Welcome back, Nerd Herd. Marvin Elequin from Dynasty Nerds. I'm excited to share with you guys a brand new video series where I'll be highlighting players that I value higher than consensus ADP. And so for this video series, I'll be using Sleeper's Dynasty ADP, and we'll be running that against my Dynasty rankings. And so we'll start off the series with the wide receiver position here today. I'll give you guys 3 players that I value higher than current ADP heading into 2021. So the first receiver I want to highlight here for you guys is DJ Moore, Carolina Panthers wide receiver. He's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 20 in ADP. I have him 10 spots higher at wide receiver 10. And heading into the 2020 season, there was some uncertainty as to what his role could be. We've grown accustomed to his high target, high reception role that was so fantasy friendly from 2019. Well, in 2020, it turns out his role would change. He would actually be targeted further down the field. We would see that his total targets would decline. His total receptions would decline. He would average more deep targets per game in 2020 than he did in 2019. And despite all of that, though, we did see him set a new career high in receiving yards with 1,193 yards. And that's because despite the lower volume, he offset a lot of that with added efficiency. He set career highs in yards per reception, yards per target, air yards per target, and was just as effective after the catch per reception as he was the year before. Now, there's a lot to like about DJ Moore going forward. I think with Curtis Samuel being a free agent, we could see his 7.7 targets per game potentially go back into the offense. Some of that could go towards DJ Moore. We could also see a slight improvement from the quarterback play, whether that be Teddy Bridgewater kind of taking that next step and improving in his second year in this offense, hopefully having a full offseason to build some more chemistry with his receivers. But they could also draft a quarterback. They could draft a quarterback in their current slot, or they could even trade up and try to grab one of the top quarterbacks in this draft class. But what I want to highlight here, and while those are all great things and things that would boost DJ Moore's potential production going forward, I want to highlight what DJ Moore has done up to this point in his career and what that means for his future going forward. Since 1992, we've only seen 16 wide receivers accumulate a minimum of 3,000 receiving yards, 300 targets, and 200 receptions in the first 3 years of their career. Of those 16 wide receivers, and keep in mind, this is a list headlined by guys like Beckham Jr., Michael Thomas, Larry Fitzgerald, Randy Moss, 75% of those 16 receivers would have at least 3 wide receiver 1 seasons in their career. After this 2020 season, you have Calvin Ridley and DJ Moore joining this list. We love Calvin Ridley. He's rightfully being drafted as a Dynasty wide receiver 1 after what he did here in 2020. But let's not forget about DJ Moore, what he's done so far in his career and what he can be in this offense going forward. I truly think his Dynasty ADP of wide receiver 20 is not factoring in his upside. He's someone who I'm trying to target in all of my Dynasty leagues because I truly believe he'll be heavily involved in this offense and very fantasy relevant for the next few years. The next receiver on my list here is Brandon Aiyuk, San Francisco 49ers wide receiver, currently being drafted as the wide receiver 19 in ADP, and my rankings have him a little bit higher at wide receiver 15. There wasn't a lot of hype for Brandon Aiyuk entering into the season, despite being a first-round receiver, and part of that is because of some of the big-name receivers drafted ahead of him. But in 12 games this past year, he was the wide receiver 16 in PPR points per game with 15.4 points, and one of the more productive rookie receivers behind Justin Jefferson. He was the wide receiver 14 in targets per game. He led all 49ers receivers, including tight ends, in weighted opportunity rating, and that just shows that he accounted for the majority of the target share, the air yard share for this team. And with that workload, he was actually very, very efficient as well. In my wide receiver expected fantasy points model, Brandon Aiyuk finished with 2.5 PPR points per game above his expected fantasy points. That is good for wide receiver 1 among all rookies and wide receiver 5 among all receivers with a minimum of 8 games played. Now, of course, there are some concerns here heading into 2021. We have Kittle and Debo coming back healthy, and how will that affect the target share that we've seen from Brandon Aiyuk here from his rookie season? Well, we actually had a small sample size where all three receivers were healthy, and it was only 3 games. But in those 3 games, Aiyuk actually produced a little under 12 PPR points per game. So it was good to see that he was still productive, he still produced fantasy points, and did not disappear from the offense. Now, the wild card here for this team is the quarterback position. If we take a look at their quarterbacks in Nick Mullins and Jimmy Garoppolo, they were towards the bottom in several efficiency metrics, in accuracy metrics. They were not very good. Now, what happens here if the 49ers were able to trade for Matt Stafford or for Deshaun Watson, or they went into the draft and traded up and drafted one of the top quarterbacks? This offense could take another step forward. And if that were the case, we might not be as worried about the limited volume, because this offense as a whole will just be more efficient, will be more explosive with all the receivers that they have. Now, the one last point I want to bring up here is how rare of a rookie season Brandon Aiyuk had. Over the last 20 seasons, we've only had 8 rookie wide receivers average 15 PPR points per game or more in their first year in the league. 75% of those 8 receivers have had multiple wide receiver 1 seasons. Now, Aiyuk joins this elite list along with Justin Jefferson, that's headlined by Beckham Jr., Julio Jones, Mike Evans, Michael Thomas, several receivers who were very fantasy relevant in their first year in the league, and they continue to produce for fantasy throughout their career. Now, I truly believe Brandon Aiyuk is going to be very involved in this offense going forward, even with Deebo Samuel and George Kittle healthy. And if they were to upgrade at quarterback, that could unlock the potential of this offense, and Aiyuk's upside could be significantly higher than his current ADP of wide receiver 19. The last receiver on my list that I want to highlight for you guys is Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins. He's currently being drafted in ADP as the wide receiver 15. In my rankings, I have him as my wide receiver 8. Yes, he started the year off slow with only 43% of the snaps in his first 2 weeks, but from week 3 onward, when he received more opportunity, up until Joe Burrow's injury, we saw that T. Higgins was one of the more productive receivers in the league. In that time span, he was the wide receiver 8 in receiving yards per game, wide receiver 9 in air yards per game. He was also the wide receiver 12 in PPR points per game, averaging 17.2 points. And in that time span, he was less than a point per game behind Justin Jefferson in fantasy production. We're all in love with Justin Jefferson and what he can be. He's being ranked as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver, and rightfully so, but why are we doubting T. Higgins and forgetting what he can be in this offense? He's heading into his second year in Zach Taylor's offense with Joe Burrow. This team also has the 5th highest projected cap space in the league. They have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. I expect them to surround Joe Burrow and T. Higgins with talent that will only elevate the offense and benefit the likes of T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, and just provide them with more upside and higher fantasy production. Now, I know there's a concern here with Joe Burrow and whether he'll be healthy. Will he be back by week 1? Those are questions we don't have answers to quite yet. But if dynasty managers are concerned, I would look beyond 2021 and try to trade for T. Higgins, draft T. Higgins, because truly we should be looking at the 2 to 3 year window, the 3 to 4 year window, and looking at his ADP right now being drafted as the wide receiver 15. I truly believe a year from now or 2 years from now, we could be looking at T. Higgins as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver and one of the best receivers in the league. Now, let me know what you guys think of these 3 wide receivers. Do you like them more than their current ADP? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button for all of our upcoming content to help you guys dominate your dynasty leagues heading into 2021.